Yate She Janice Benali and She Dona initially negated Najini initially Kiani Bashishin Tachini Dashiche Hazo Shanale. Hello, my name is Janice Benali. I am a 7th grade math teacher in the Gallup McKinley County School District, and I will be talking about scaffolding in this presentation. So the image over to the left was an image that really, to me, illustrated and brought together both of the definitions for scaffolding for me. I say both definitions because prior to becoming a teacher, I did work for a while within the construction field as a welder. And so anytime scaffolding was mentioned in any of our presentations or meetings or just, when I learned about it in education, I immediately thought of those supportive, those supports that we use in construction to help us to get to a specific place where we were welding. So I like that this illustration brought the definition for education and the definition used in construction for scaffolding. And I'm going to use it a lot throughout my presentation, so hopefully you don't get too tired of it. Okay, so to start things off, what is scaffolding? Scaffolding is a way, just like in the illustration there, it's a way by which we might, help our students to receive the supports that they need in order to get the information that we are teaching them. So if you notice in the picture there, those supports are in construction as well. Those supports that we provide, those scaffolding, they're only temporary to aid us in constructing that unit or specific building. And same thing with education. These supports for our students are meant to eventually guide them and build up their confidence so that they might be able to perform these tasks and on their own in the future. A definition that I came across in my reading about scaffolding is that it's used to break up our learning for our students into chunks. So it's chunking the pieces of information that we're giving them so that they might be able to, take these pieces of information in bite-sized pieces so that they don't become overwhelmed with what we're teaching them. They don't get bored, or it's just a way that we can be effective teachers. So again, it's breaking up the learning in chunks and providing those tools or structures so that the students are able to access that information and comprehend it. Some examples of scaffolding that I came across are show and tell. I'm sure all of you use, we do modeling specific problems or our objectives, whatever we are teaching our students. I know I use it a lot in math before I teach any new skill or math concept. The first thing I need to do is model it for them and share with them how that specific skill, how to implement that specific math skill. Another example of scaffolding, tap into prior knowledge. Another thing that I've been working on, getting and strengthening within my own teaching. So that's bringing together the information that they learned. It could be skills that they should have mastered maybe in 6th grade, and maybe now you're in 7th grade. So tapping into that prior knowledge, or also tapping into knowledge that they learned maybe last quarter, last semester, or even the day before. So, building those bridges and bringing that knowledge together so that they can use this entire unit to help them to access higher knowledge. Give time to talk is another example of scaffolding, allowing our students to process the information that we have just taught them by having them share it with a partner, turn and talking with a partner, or doing mixed pair share, things like that. Those are ways that we can give them that opportunity to process the things that we have just modeled for them how to do. We're teaching vocabulary, that's very important in math. Something that I've learned is very important in teaching my students. And I typically use a lot of breaking down vocabulary words. So if we read a definition, I'll have them read it in class or within their group. I'll assign one specific person to read a vocabulary word, and then I'll bring it back to the whole class. Okay, what words in that definition do we not understand? And what words do we understand? How can we build off of that information to help us to understand this more complex math term that we are just being introduced to? Using visual aids, such things as anchor charts, that's something that I rely heavily upon. Being a new teacher, a lot of teachers gave me, some anchor charts. I know that was one thing when I first became my first year of teaching. My teachers didn't like that I didn't have anything on my walls. And if I wanted to put stuff up, I wanted to have, be my own, something that I created with my class. And so they gave me all these different anchor charts to use, but I quickly made my own in the process and was able to replace them with something that I had made and I constructed with my students. So visual aids are very important for me. They're a quick way for students to access prior knowledge. Again, tap into that prior knowledge that we taught them a unit before, a quarter before, things like that, things that we've learned throughout the semester. It's a quick way for them to go and see how, a quick example of how maybe some basic foundational skills that we have learned prior, and for them to quickly access that information. Pause, ask questions, pause and review. So again, just taking that time for students to process the information that we are giving them. Chunking. The why do we scaffold? Some of the why that I read about in my reading were it builds confidence. So if you notice in the illustration there, students, we start at the very basic. The implementation of scaffolding is important as well. When we're building a unit or a piece of structure, that scaffolding isn't all thrown up there at once. We start at the very first platform, until that first basic, those foundational structure is built in and mastered, and then we gradually work our way up to the top of the building. So as students, as we implement those supports for the students to be able to access that learning, and as we put those supports there for them, they gain momentum, they build that confidence to be able to access those higher pieces of learning that we get to later on. Self-regulation, self-learners, autonomy, those are some other terms that I came across in my reading. Our ultimate goal for our students is for us to, our ultimate goal for us as educators is to create self-learners, students that are able to research things and ask questions and to find answers to those questions, and just building that self responsibility and creating those students with mindsets that they can learn these things on their own, and they can ask for help, and they can advocate for themselves. So scaffolding, is a way that we can do those things for our students. And what really works with universal design for learning book, they cited scaffolding as a way for us to sustain the attention of our students. And, as we give our students those basic supports to master those basic concepts and gradually work our way up, we are able to keep their attention. Something interesting that I came across was the placement of those scaffolds. If we're providing scaffolding at the very basic part of, of our learning where they don't need that information, that can also create an environment where our students are bored. So again, placing those supports at the appropriate places is another important principle to think about whenever we are providing those supports and that scaffolding for our students. But ultimately, the purpose of scaffolding is for us to, for our students to be interested and to sustain their attention so that they can do the things that we're asking them in our objective and in our lessons. So I'm going to go through 3 of those examples that I talked about prior, examples of how I apply scaffolding in my classroom. So one of the first ones I want to focus on is tapping into prior knowledge. Just a few weeks ago, or at one point in our math learning, we were talking about how to convert fractions to decimals using long division. And these were some of the terms that we came across in that specific lesson. And what I've been trying to do is just be better about providing more opportunities for our students to read in the classroom. So in this specific lesson, I had the students, they're always put into groups, and I assigned, my twos, go ahead and read the first definition for in your groups. They read it, and then I brought it back to the whole class, and I pulled out some words that I thought that they might not know. So I asked them, what does finite mean? Raise your hand if you know what finite means, if you can define that for the class. No hands were raised. So I said, okay, well, I wrote the word infinity on the board. What does infinite mean? Raise your hand if you know what infinite means, and you can explain that to the class. And right away some hands shot up, and they were able to, it means something that goes on forever, something that's never ending, that doesn't stop. And so I wrote those down, and then I went back to the term finite. Okay, I wrote it on the board. Now turn and talk to your partner about what you think finite means. And immediately they were able to discuss with their partner. Oh, infinite means that something that is never ending. Finite must mean something that does end, something that that stops. And so that was a way for me to kind of provide that, tap into that prior knowledge of, we know what these basic terms mean. How can I use that information to help my students to access more complex terms that we are learning about? Another way that I provide scaffolding in my classroom is allowing that time to talk. Earlier on in teaching, something I was constantly brought up in a lot of my evaluations were that I wasn't allowing time for students to engage and interact with another. So this is something that I've been really trying to implement a lot more in my classroom. By allowing those moments for them to turn and talk with their partner, and to get up and do things like think, pair, share, or mixed pair share is one of my favorite things to do. It gives me an opportunity to play music, and students get up and they mix, pair up with someone when the music stops, and then answer the question that I put on the board. And so that is something that I think provides a quick break with the music, and also, brings it back, giving them an opportunity to share and process again with a partner about what we just talked about by answering a question and giving them the opportunity to express and apply the things that we have learned. So giving time to talk is something that I really find helpful in my classroom, and helps me to fulfill that requirement of allowing that turn and talk time, processing time. Another way that I provide scaffolding in my classroom, again, is by using visual aids. Again, I had shared how I like to create my own anchor charts, just because I feel like one of my first principals had brought up to me, whenever we are creating those anchor charts with our students, it really reinforces that learning that we are building in the classroom. And so whenever, that's something that's just always stuck with me. So anytime I am, doing a lesson, I always try to break it down, or sketch out a quick anchor chart that I might use for that specific lesson. And yeah, I'll go through and we'll fill in the anchor chart together as a class, and then I'll keep it up so that they can access it. Later on down the road, we might be working on a more complex, a more difficult math concept, and they might have to rely upon some of those basic tools that we might have gone over in the past. And so those anchor charts and those visuals are great for me, and I find that my students really rely heavily upon those. Just being able to put them up in my classroom and putting them in a place where my students can easily access that information. I find that just them mentioning it, Ms. Benali, where's the anchor chart that we had for converting a fraction to a decimal, or where's the anchor chart that we had for the rules for multiplying integers? When I hear those types of those questions, or those types of requests, it helps me to realize how important those visual aids really are for my students, so that they have those supports there for them to be successful in their learning. With that said, that is the end of my presentation, and thank you all so much for being here. Bye.